Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, it is Rule 5 Protection Day. We will talk about who the Dodgers might protect from the Rule 5 draft, all the rules that go into that, and a bunch of other stuff you might want to know about the Rule 5 draft. We will answer a listener question about Shohei Ohtani and the special rules that apply to him and what those rules might be worth to a team. And the Rookie of the Year voting was announced on Monday. James Outman finished third. We'll talk about that. That's what's on tap. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now. Then you can be an everydayer just like we are. If this is your first time with us, I am Jeff Snider. My normal co-host is Vince Samperio, although it's just me today. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And as I said at the opening, today is Rule 5 Protection Day. And we're going to talk about that. What that means, we'll just jump right in. What Rule 5 Protection Day means is that today, I think it's 3:00 p.m. Pacific time. By then, teams have to set their 40-man roster. It's not a permanent setting, but it is a semi-permanent setting. 40-man rosters are basically frozen this afternoon until the Rule 5 draft, which happens on the last day of the winter meetings in Nashville in a few weeks. And so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of rundown what the Rule 5 draft is, the rules, the eligibility, all of that, and what it means for the Dodgers this year. Basically, the Rule 5 draft every year at the winter meetings, almost every year. A couple of years ago, they didn't have it, but most of the time they have the Rule 5 draft, and any player who is eligible to be drafted can be drafted. To be eligible, you can't be on the 40-man roster. Anybody on the 40-man roster is automatically ineligible to be drafted in the Rule 5 draft. And then the other eligibility is based on how old you were when you signed and how long you've been in the organization. So if you were 18 years old when you signed, you are eligible for the Rule 5 draft after 5 years. If you were 19 years or older, you're eligible for the Rule 5 draft after 4 years. And so anybody who meets those eligibility requirements and isn't on the 40-man roster can be selected by any team during the draft. Now, if a team takes a player in the Rule 5 draft, they are required to keep that guy on the active roster, the 26-man roster, big league roster for the entire upcoming season. And so, and there's really the only loophole there is if a guy gets hurt, a legitimate injury, he can be placed on the injured list. There have been grievances filed and won based on teams trying to manipulate the injured list for purposes of Rule 5 draft. And so I don't think teams try to game that system very often anymore. So a player has to be on the active roster or the major league injured list the entire next season. And so when teams are thinking about who to protect, there are some easy answers. You know, the Dodgers right now, they have, let's say, Waylon Santana. That's a name that I don't know if I've ever heard, even though I'm sure I've seen it because it's on this list of Dodgers minor leaguers that I look at pretty often. Waylon Santana, though, is eligible for the Rule 5 draft this year. He has not played higher than low A. He pitched 3 innings for Rancho Cucamonga in low A this year. He pitched 40 and 2/3 innings for the Arizona League Dodgers, one of their teams, and he had a 6.42 ERA in rookie ball. And so that Waylon Santana is a good example of a guy who won't be taken in the Rule 5 draft because no major league team is going to be willing to keep Waylon Santana on their active roster all next year. He, while he may be a good prospect or have some prospect potential, he's not ready for the big leagues, and a team would be putting itself at a major disadvantage. So I feel bad for Waylon Santana now that I randomly chose him. I hope his parents don't listen to this podcast. I suspect they don't. I don't know how big we are in the Dominican Republic, but probably not super big. But any player like that who's not going to be selected, a team doesn't need to worry about. Dodgers don't need to worry about protecting Waylon Santana. But there are guys, there are two players who the Dodgers are for sure going to add to their 40-man roster, Nick Frasso and Landon Knack. Both of those guys are becoming eligible for the 40-man or for the Rule 5 draft for the first time this year. And both guys are top prospects. And so they would absolutely, if either Nick Frasso or Landon Knack got unprotected, he would be the first pick in the Rule 5 draft. So Dodgers would definitely protect them. Another guy who they will probably protect is catcher Hunter Fiducia. We've talked about Fiducia in the past. It's kind of interesting. Fiducia was eligible last year for the Rule 5 draft. The Dodgers didn't protect him, and he wasn't taken. But he had a pretty good year this year, and it seems likely that the Dodgers will probably protect him. Then there's more tricky options. Jose Ramos is one. He's another guy who was eligible last year, wasn't taken, but he seems like the kind of guy who might be taken. Just somebody taking a bet on potential. Kendall Williams could be a guy. He's eligible for the first time this year, and could be protected, could be taken if he's not protected, or he could stay in the organization without being protected. He's one that's kind of on the border. And so I guess the other part of this rule is, so when you take a player in the Rule 5 draft, the selecting team gives the player's previous team $100,000. And then if the time comes, and we'll just use a real example. Last year, the Brewers took Gus Varland from the Dodgers. Gus Varland, I feel like he might have been drafted by somebody else and then traded to the Brewers. I don't remember. You're allowed to trade those players. And whoever trades for them just assumes the same rules of having to keep the player on the roster. But anyway, Gus Varland ended up on the Brewers after the Rule 5 draft. He started the season with the Brewers, and then after a while, they didn't want him on their active roster anymore. So they have to put him on waivers. And in Gus Varland's case, he cleared waivers. Nobody claimed him. Any team claiming a player off waivers is, again, subject to the same Rule 5 rules. So would have to keep that player on their active roster the rest of the season. When Gus Varland cleared waivers, then he had to be offered back to the Dodgers for $50,000. So for half of the money that they received for him in the first place. In Varland's case, the Dodgers took Varland back for the $50,000. He ended up pitching for them in the big leagues, and they all lived happily ever after, or whatever. That's how the Rule 5 draft works. And, every team has different strategies. One thing we do know, the Dodgers are very unlikely to draft anyone in the Rule 5 draft because they've got a stacked minor league system already. Obviously, if, no, they're not going to take anybody, because even if somebody did slip through the cracks, the Dodgers had the third best record in baseball last year, which means they will be picking 28th in the Rule 5 draft. And so they will pass. They're not going to take anybody. But they probably will have some guys selected. And it's tough to know who it could be. You look at the guys who are eligible for the first time this year or previously eligible and weren't protected. Ryan Ward, Drew Avens, Hyun-Il Choi, John Rooney, Braden Fisher, Cody Hosey, Justin Yurchak. Actually, Yurchak might have opted for free agency. I can't remember for sure. Anyway, a handful of guys, Yainer Fernandez, Carson Taylor. There are some guys who could be taken in the Rule 5 draft and who are unlikely to be protected. So it'll be interesting to see. But the other thing I needed to mention is I mentioned that this is a semi-permanent lockdown of the roster. What that means is after today, this afternoon, when they set their 40-man roster, the Dodgers can't trade anyone until after the Rule 5 draft, which means there are going to be trades made in the major leagues. I don't know if the Dodgers are making any trades, but teams will be making trades today before that deadline to trade. The Dodgers might trade a guy like Drew Avans, who they think might get taken in the Rule 5 draft. They don't want to protect him, trade him before the Rule 5 draft so they can actually get something for him, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the skinny on the Rule 5 draft. If you think I missed anything or you have any other questions, hit me up. I love talking this nerdy stuff. In a minute, I'm going to talk about some more nerdy rules. These ones are specific to Shohei Ohtani and the roster rules around him. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. Moneyline bet just means I think this team's going to win. They won. We're not talking over under. We're not talking point spread, any of that. Just a moneyline bet. You pick the winner. If you're right, you get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. $150 if your team wins. If you had picked the Denver Broncos in Monday Night Football last night, you would have won $150 in bonus bets. You might have been nervous at the end, but you would have won it. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hey, I am back. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Especially want to thank our everydayers, those of you who are with us every weekday morning. We really appreciate that. We are, what was I going to say? I don't remember. Anyway, Sirius XM, I know baseball season's over. They still have a lot of baseball content, especially on MLB Network Radio. They also have a lot of Christmas music content. If you love that, I've mentioned before, the new Jolly Christmas station on Channel 105 is really, really good. I like it a lot. And Country Christmas is currently available on the SXM app. It'll be available on your radio in your car in a few weeks. So check out Sirius XM. And if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the YouTube comment section. If you're listening on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you through social media or email. I'll give you all that contact info at the end of the episode, like I always do. So jumping back into the episode, I got an email from a listener, and it was pretty interesting. Actually, it was an email exchange, but I'll consolidate it down into one conversation. Ken Rosenberg is his name. He's a loyal listener. We email back and forth a lot. LockedOnDodgers@gmail.com if you ever want to email us. And he says, he asked a question. He says, each team has an active roster of up to 26 players for each game, 13 pitchers and 13 hitters. When Shohei Ohtani was healthy, pitching and hitting, how did MLB count him? If he was counted as a pitcher, were the Angels allowed 13 additional hitters? And does the winner of the Ohtani sweepstakes get in effect to have an additional player active for every game where he is pitching? And I love this question. And if you're not, like, I'm a rules nerd. I actually have bookmarks for all of the MLB rules, the CBA, the baseball rules, and the Major League Baseball rules, all bookmarked in my browser. That's why I know all about the Rule 5 draft from the last segment. You won't be surprised to learn that it's called the Rule 5 draft because the rules are covered in rule number 5 of the official Major League Baseball rules. That's why they call it the Rule 5 draft. And so also in that rule book is the rules related to two-way players, the Ohtani rules, as some people call it. And two-way players, they don't get a fancy name like Rule 5 draft, although they could. Two-way players are defined in rule number 2, section D, I believe. And so you can, that's where it says that players can have, or teams can have up to 26 players on the roster and only no more than 13 pitchers. So one thing that Ken had almost right, there's not actually any limitation on the number of hitters that you can have on a team, the number of non-pitchers. The only limit is on the number of pitchers. You can't have more than 13 pitchers on your roster. The thing about Shohei Ohtani, though, is that he does not count towards that limit. Two-way players, of which currently Shohei Ohtani is the only one, they don't count towards that limitation. And so when Shohei Ohtani is healthy, pitching and hitting, he is an extra pitcher on the roster. That team can essentially have up to 14 pitchers as long as one of them is their two-way player. Theoretically, a team could have 5 two-way players and really get around this. They could have up to 18 pitchers on their roster as long as, the 5 extras were all qualified two-way players. Now, to be a two-way player, you have to qualify. And your qualification is based on you have to have pitched at least 20 innings. Pitched at least 20 innings in a season and had at least 20 games started as a position player or DH with at least 3 plate appearances in each of those games. And so once you meet those standards, then you are a qualified two-way player. And your qualification lasts the rest of that season and all of the next season. And so to look at what this means practically, Shohei Ohtani, because he had at least 20 innings pitched and at least 20 starts in which he had 3 plate appearances as a position player in 2023, Shohei Ohtani qualifies for 2024 as a two-way player, which means that he can pitch anytime they want him to, and he doesn't count towards the pitcher limit. The reason that players have to be designated as a two-way player is because of the limits they put on who's allowed to pitch. Remember, position players pitching used to just be the Wild West. You could have any position player pitch anytime you wanted. Now there's rules. It has to be either extra innings or up by a certain number of runs or down by a certain number of runs. I think it's, up by 10 or down by 8, maybe something like that. Anyway, in order for a position player to pitch, but a qualified two-way player can pitch anytime. And so that's the benefit. And so as I explained to Ken in my reply to his email, one of the big benefits is teams are limited to 13 pitchers, but they're not limited on position players. Now, if a team wanted to have 13 pitchers and they have Shohei Ohtani, they could have an extra position player, because basically Ohtani would be their 13th pitcher and they would still have room for 13 other position players besides him. And so while it's still 26 players, it's essentially 27 players, 13 pitchers and 14 position players. It's just that one of the pitchers and one of the position players happen to be the same person. And so the other things, they could have 14 pitchers. They could carry their full 13 pitchers plus Ohtani, who doesn't count towards the pitcher limit. And so either way they do it, either they get an extra pitcher or they get an extra hitter by just going with 12 pitchers plus Ohtani. So either way, a team like that, whichever team has Shohei Ohtani, has an advantage there. And so Ken's follow-up question was, for purposes of Ohtani's contract negotiations, what is the dollar value to a team in being able to carry essentially 27 players when other teams can only carry 26? And that is the question of the year, the question of the offseason. That's what every team is trying to figure out. And that's what we're going to figure out over the next, couple months, however long it takes Ohtani to sign. That's what we're going to see, is how much teams value that, because you could say, well, he deserves the money of a pitcher and a hitter, a great pitcher and a great hitter rolled into one. And in a way that's true. But also there's arguments that it should be more and arguments that should be less. The argument for less valuable than 2 different players is you're rolling all that risk into one player. If this player gets hurt, if Shohei Ohtani, breaks his ankle sliding into second base, you're losing a pitcher and a hitter at once. And so extra risk rolled into one player diminishes that value somewhat. But also having the 2 players in one plus the extra roster spot, that enhances the value some. And so when we talk about, a pitcher of Otani's quality would probably be looking at getting 20 to 25 million a year on the open market this year. Obviously Otani won't be pitching in 2024, which adds another wrinkle. Actually, I'll rewind a little bit. When Otani does come back, say the Dodgers sign him this year, this offseason, he doesn't pitch at all in 2024. Going into 2025, Otani will take up one of the pitcher spots on the roster because he won't have qualified in 2024 by pitching 20 innings and starting 20 games as a position player. He will have to requalify, and that means for the first month of the season, long enough for Otani to get his 20 starts as a position player and pitch 20 innings, he would only be a pitcher for roster reasons. He's still allowed to play in the field because there are no limits on who can play a position. The Dodgers could start Clayton Kershaw at first base. Nobody cares about that. It's the position players pitching that the rules are designed for. So Otani, for the first month of 2025, for whatever team he's on, he will be pitching and playing designated hitter, but he will count towards the pitcher limit. So anyway, going back to the value there, it's hard to say how teams will value it because, like I said, a pitcher would get 20, 25 million a year. A hitter of Otani's caliber would get 30 million a year. So does Otani get the 50 to 55 million a year? He just might. And then it's just a question of years. I've said all along, I'm dubious that he's going to get a $500 million contract. Even before he got hurt, I'm just not convinced that's going to happen. I think he will get 50 million a year or 10 years. I don't think he'll get both. I could be wrong. And I'm not, I'm not going to do something like Mad Dog Russo and guarantee I'll quit if he does. But I just have a hard time seeing, I think he'll get a ton of money, a long contract for a lot of money per year. I don't think it'll be half $1 billion overall. But anyway, that's the big question. And I don't have a satisfying answer for Ken's question about how much value does that add. I think every team is going to value that differently. And that's what's going to make this free agency so fascinating to watch, is the different offers he gets and the way different teams value him. I think will be really, really fun to watch. And hopefully it'll end with him in Dodger blue. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about James Outman. They announced the Rookie of the Year voting on Monday, and he finished third. We will talk about that voting and all that. That's what's on tap. So please keep it locked on Dodgers. Hey, I'm back. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember to check out SiriusXM and the SXM app for all your baseball and Christmas music needs. And thanks for being an everydayer. If you're not an everydayer, just watch or listen every weekday morning, and then you're an everydayer. It's super fun. Rookie of the Year voting was announced on Monday. Gunnar Henderson, unsurprisingly, won in the American League. James Outman finished third in the National League. Corbin Carroll was the unanimous winner in the National League, to no one's surprise. Kodai Senga finished second. Outman got 5 second-place votes and 5 third-place votes. Good enough to finish third overall. And we talked a week or two ago when they announced the finalists, and we say finalists. What it means is the top 3 vote getters. They call them finalists. That's not what finalists mean. I have an English degree. Finalists means here are the 3 people you can choose from in your voting. What this is here are the 3 people who got the most votes. The voting is already done. There's nothing more to be done. We're just telling you 3, and then later we'll tell you the top one. But when they did announce those finalists, for lack of a better word, they accidentally in the original release put them in probably what was the winner's order rather than alphabetical order. And so even if we hadn't already pretty much known that Corbin Carroll and Gunnar Henderson were going to win the Rookie of the Year, we would have known after that tweet that Jeff Passan deleted. And it got me thinking, like, Corbin Carroll absolutely deserved it. Gunnar Henderson definitely deserved it. There, no question there. When you look at the other awards, the player awards this year, you've got Cy Young and MVP coming up. Shohei Ohtani is going to be the American League MVP, and Ronald Acuna is going to be the National League MVP. And Cy Young voting is going to be Garrett Cole and Blake Snell. And even before Jeff Passan's deleted tweet that told us that, we kind of knew that was going to be the case. And I wonder, I'd have to look back and see if there's ever been another year where all 6 of these major player awards were essentially foregone conclusions. Like there's arguments to be made for other people in some of these areas. Like, and we made the argument earlier during the season that Mookie Betts should have been the MVP, but that was before Acuna had a great September and Mookie had a lousy September. The fact is, Ronald Acuna should be the National League MVP, and he will be. Blake Snell, even though he will have the highest walk rate, both in walks per 9 and walk percentage of any pitcher ever to win the Cy Young Award, you know what? It was kind of a weak year for National League pitchers. And despite walking almost everybody he faced, Blake Snell had a very good season. And so Snell's going to win. Garrett Cole's going to win. And there's just so little drama here. In the American League MVP, Shohei Ohtani, like it took Aaron Judge hitting 62 home runs in 2022 to beat out Ohtani that year. And even then, some people were saying Ohtani deserved it. And this year, there was no Aaron Judge. Corey Seager had a great season, but he missed even more time than Ohtani did with injury. You just can't compare. And so all of these are just foregone conclusions. The only awards that have any sort of intrigue or mystery are the Manager of the Year. And we already know they got it wrong in the National League because the guy who should have won isn't even one of the top 3. But when Bruce Bochy and Craig Counsell win the Manager of the Year award, yeah, I mean, you could have made arguments there. The only reason we know who's going to win those is because Jeff Passan's deleted tweet. But beyond that, the awards for the actual players, just not much intrigue. James Outman had a great season for the Dodgers as far as rookies go, but he also had a really, really lousy May. You remember that? And he struggled at times. Very deserving of third place. Nobody would have made a case for him to win Rookie of the Year. He didn't get any first place votes. Kodai Senga, there was more drama between second and third place just because Senga is 30 years old. There are some voters who have always had issues with players coming over from professional baseball in Japan, calling them rookies, but also Ichiro won the Rookie of the Year award. Like there have been plenty of guys who come over, Hideo Nomo, plenty of guys come over from the Japanese professional leagues and still get treated as rookies and win the Rookie of the Year award, or in Senga's case, finish in second place. So yeah, you could have made a case because Outman is more of a true rookie than Senga. I'm sure the 5 people who voted for Outman for second place, that was part of their thinking. But the fact is, intrigue between second and third place in the National League Rookie of the Year isn't a lot of intrigue. And I think 2023 was a weird season in a lot of ways. There was just so many of these, we're seeing it playing out because, Ohtani we've known since May that Ohtani was going to win the MVP this year in the American League. We've had a good idea most of the year that it was probably going to be Acuna, even when we were making the case that Mookie should win it at the end of August. We didn't necessarily think he would. It seems like it's been Acuna's to lose, and Acuna earned it in September. So just so little intrigue. It doesn't really take any of the fun out of it for me, to the extent that award season is fun. Like it's still fun. Like I'm happy for Corbin Carroll. I got nothing against that guy, even though his team beat the Dodgers in the playoffs. Corbin Carroll is a fun player to watch, and it's fun to see a guy come up. Him and Henderson both actually. They were top prospects. They spent the whole year in the big leagues, and they won the Rookie of the Year award. They lived up to their billing, to their hype, to their prospect status, and won their Rookie of the Year award. That's awesome for them. I know the Orioles get a bonus draft pick because of Henderson. I don't know for sure if the D-backs do or not. I assume they would because they're Henderson and Carroll kind of in the same boat. They both played a handful of games in 2022 in the big leagues, and they both spent the whole year in the big leagues this year, starting from opening day. So I assume that the D-backs and Orioles will both get a bonus draft pick because of the new rules in the new CBA, encouraging teams to actually promote their top prospects. So, happy for them. Happy for James Outman. Taking third is nothing to sneeze at. And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Does this feel like an anticlimactic award season to you too, or is that just me? Love to hear your thoughts on Rule 5 stuff. Love to hear your thoughts on the Ohtani rules. I think I covered everything. The Dodgers roster right now. One other thing I meant to mention in the Rule 5 segment, the Dodgers roster, 40-man roster is currently at 35 guys. And so they have plenty of space to protect for sure. They will for sure protect, probably Hunter Fiducia too. That would put them at 38. They could protect more, but they also need some roster spots at some point to sign guys or trade for guys. And we will have, there's options to make room on that 40-man roster, as we talked about before, different guys who could be released or non-tendered or whatever, but that's where the roster stands right now. That's going to do it for me for today. Thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Especially want to thank our everydayers. If you're not an everydayer, it's easy to become one. Just watch or listen every weekday morning. Remember to check out SiriusXM and the SXM app for all your baseball and Christmas music needs. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. We are at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at VinceSince91. I am on Twitter at Snydog, and the DMs are open for both of us. Our email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com, and our phone number for voicemails or text messages is 323-863-LOCK, 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.